Hey, good morning again, and welcome to Vive. We're in week 5 of our extremely emotional series, and we are in week 3. We've been talking about enemies of the heart, and I'm going to jump right into the message this morning because I've got more notes than time. We literally have about 20 pages of notes. Don't get too nervous. I will get you out of here sometime today. All right. So, no, it won't be too long. But man, this is our week 3 of talking about enemies of the heart. We've talked about anger, we've talked about guilt, and we're going to be talking about jealousy next week. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23 says, guard your heart, for it affects everything you do. And so it's so important that we take time to monitor not just our behavior, but our heart. See, we have grown up being trained to monitor our behavior, the things we do. And that's why we can act a certain way on the outside, but inside, there's something broken. There's something wrong with us. And see, if we're not careful to monitor our heart, then it's our heart that drives us. It's our heart that motivates us. And we find ourselves doing things and saying things. We wonder, where did that come from? Well, it comes out of the heart. Jesus said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And see, our heart is what drives us. And so we are in a quest to not only detox our heart, but also to monitor our heart, because it's important what's going on inside of us. We talked about anger and how anger basically says, you owe me. And the remedy for anger is forgiveness. And then we talked about guilt, which says, I owe you. And the remedy for guilt in our lives is confession, repentance. Today we're going to look at greed. Greed is one of those things that says, I owe me. See, greed is different from all other enemies of the heart. It's different from anger, different from guilt. It's different from jealousy, because greed is way harder to detect. Really hard to detect. See, greedy people believe that they deserve every good thing that comes their way. As a matter of fact, greedy people believe that they deserve every good thing that could potentially come their way. They say, it's mine because I've earned it, and I've got a lot more coming. See, it's hard to get a greedy person to part with their stuff, with their money. Here's the reason. It's because they're scared. And sometimes there's good reason. Sometimes, we grow up in situations where we don't have a whole lot. I remember growing up, I come from a family of 6 kids, and there was a time where our family went through a really bad financial situation, living up north, and coal mines were shutting down, and the economy was crashing. It was in the late 70s, and I know most of you probably weren't born yet, but that's okay. I'm that old. And so, just bad times. And I remember going to the grocery store with my mom and her paying with food stamps and being on welfare. I remember that. I remember hearing constantly, we don't have the money for that. We don't have the money for that. When friends had stuff. And I can understand where sometimes maybe there's a tendency to want to hold on to things because you didn't have it when you were growing up. Or maybe you went through a situation where you lost a job or your health failed and you had bills that were and you lost things, and there's a tendency to be afraid, and so fear is what motivates greed. And sometimes it's easy to understand, but see, greed is very good at disguising itself. Maybe this morning you're thinking, hey, anger, yeah, I got some anger issues, yeah. Hey, guilt, yeah, we all have guilt, right? But greed, not sure this is an issue that I deal with, right? See, I've never met a greedy person. At least I've never met a greedy person who looks me in the eyes and says, you know what, I struggle with greed. They say things like this. They say things like, I'm careful. See, we've made it nearly impossible to self-diagnose ourselves with greed. Nearly impossible. Because unlike anger and guilt, greed disguises itself by hiding behind virtues. Greed disguises itself by hiding behind good things. See, greedy people are savers, and saving is a good thing. Greedy people are planners, and planning is a good thing. Greedy people want to make sure that their financial future is secure. And you know what? That's a good thing. See, greed hides behind good things. It hides behind virtues, which makes it almost impossible for us to self-diagnose ourselves, right? It's hard to identify it in ourselves, but it's easy to detect in others, isn't it? See, we can identify in almost instantly in other people. See, greedy people talk a lot and worry a lot about money. Greedy people are not cheerful givers. Greedy people are reluctant to share. They're poor losers. They quibble over insignificant sums of money. Greedy people talk as if they have just enough to get by. Greedy people often create a culture of secrecy around themselves. Greedy people won't let you forget when they've done something for you. You're thinking of some greedy people, aren't you? I mean, you already got their number in your phone. Greedy, no. It's easy to diagnose greed in other people. It's almost impossible to diagnose it in ourselves because it hides behind virtues. It hides behind good things. Greedy people are reluctant to express gratitude. Greedy people aren't content with what they have. And greedy people attempt to control people with their money. See, I've met greedy people who are poor, who are rich, who are middle class, who are young, and who are old. Greed is not a financial issue. It's a heart issue. Let me say it again. Greed is not a financial issue. It's a heart issue. See, financial gain doesn't make greedy people less greedy. Financial gain or loss doesn't change anything because greed emanates from our heart. It's not a financial issue. It's a heart issue. Is this an issue for you? That's the question. Is it hard for you to give away money? Are you quick to make excuses? Do you ask questions that make you look like a careful steward, but really you're looking for an excuse not to give? When you give, do you feel like somebody owes you something? Are there strings attached? Consider this warning from Jesus. Let's look at Luke chapter 12. We're going to look at verses 15 through 21 if you're following along in your Bible. But we'll have the verses up on the screen. Luke 12, 15 through 21. Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." Be on your guard is what Jesus says. Why would he say be on your guard? Because of the four enemies of the heart, of the four heart conditions that we're talking about. Greed is the most subtle of all, the hardest to identify. See, he says life does not consist in an abundance of things. And for the greedy person, though, life equals stuff. My stuff is my life. See, their stuff is an extension of who they are. And the driving force behind it is fear. What if? What if there's not enough? What if I don't get my fair share? What if he or she has more than me? What if the economy crashes? So all these what ifs and all this fear drives our greed. People who have greed lodged in their hearts are afraid that God can't or he won't take care of them. Let me say that again. People who have greed lodged in their hearts are afraid that God can't or won't take care of them. Or they're afraid that God won't take care of them in the fashion or the style that they want to be cared for. Should I say it again? I'll do it. Or they're afraid that God won't take care of them in the fashion or the style that they want to be cared for. See, there's a gap. The gap between what God might be willing to do and what they want God to do becomes a major source of anxiety. And greedy people, they shoulder that burden to acquire and maintain everything that they need to have a sense of security, the security that they desire. There's a problem. There's a problem for greedy people because there's never enough. Greedy people can never have enough to satisfy their need to feel secure. It's like any appetite that we have. Appetites cannot be satisfied. There are too many what ifs. So they never feel like they have enough, which is the very thing they fear. See, there comes a point in our life where we have to confront this enemy of the heart. We have to confront greed. See, the person who's coated with greed, whose heart is coated with greed, believes that they've earned the things that they've come into. And because they earned them, they're going to handle them the way they want to handle them. They're determined to control these things the way they see fit. Greedy people have this supersized sense of ownership. They don't understand that really we're all just managers of the stuff. See, greed is fueled by that fear. God can't or won't take care of me. And if God won't, then who will? I've got to do it myself, right? And greedy people set out to acquire and maintain everything they need to provide this sense of security. The challenge that we have is in identifying greed, because it's very hard to identify. It disguises itself. It hides. And that's why Jesus said, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Why such a strong warning? See, because greed can take up residence in our heart and live there for many years undetected. It hides. And an unguarded heart is very susceptible to this disease. Jesus went on to say, he said, life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Life's not about stuff. Doesn't everybody know that? Do people really believe that their lives are equivalent to what they own? Yeah, people really do believe that. And maybe you're here this morning and you're one of them. See, we are more prone to this way of thinking than we realize. Jesus started into a parable. It's called a parable or a story to make his point. In verse 16 and 17, let's look at it. He said, and he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no places to store my crops. And so here's this farmer, this landowner. He says, what am I going to do with all my stuff, which is a result of my hard work? I have no place to store my crops. That's farmer talk for save. He needs a place to hoard his reserves. See, in an agricultural society, and that's the society in which Jesus told this story, people were farmers. People understood what he was talking about. We don't typically farm. We might plant a flower now and then. But in an agricultural society, the people understood that it wasn't the farmer or the landowner's hard work that yielded an abundance. It was something that was outside of his control. And see, the farmer, the landowner, failed to recognize the God factor in his life. He was under the impression this was his hard work. This is what he did. And what am I going to do with all my stuff now that I have it? And he ignored the fact that maybe God was involved in all that stuff. See, farmers are at the mercy of factors that are outside of their control. See, a greedy person doesn't see life that way. They don't see life with the God factor. What comes their way does so because they've earned it. And since the landowner believes that he's earned it, he never has the notion, he never has the thought, God might have something to do with this. Never crossed his mind that this extra that he's experiencing is intended for anyone else except him. The question really that the farmer, the landowner should have been asking is, Lord, what do you want me to do with my extra? Can we do something this morning? Because I believe this statement can change your life. That's a big promise, isn't it? I believe it can change your life if you let it sink into your heart. Would you say this with me? Would you say, Lord, what do you want me to do with my extra? See, greedy people don't think like that. Greedy people don't ask that question. But we're not greedy, right? Those are the people we were thinking about earlier. But God, what do you want me to do with my extra? Let's say it out loud. Lord, what do you want me to do with my extra? All right, now let's say it like we really mean it. Lord, what do you want me to do with my extra? That sounded like you meant it that time. See, greedy people don't talk like that. They don't ask that kind of question. What do you want me to do with my extra? This farmer, this landowner, he didn't think like that. See, when you come into some extra, do you typically think, lucky me, wow, look at this. Now I can get that thing I've wanted, right? See, like the landowner in this story, sometimes we have things we can just come up with. You know, we have stuff in mind that we're looking for when the extra comes. And we typically think the extra is for us, just like he did. See, we earned it, right? We deserve it. So we store it. And that's exactly what the landowner decides to do. Verse 18 and 19. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. Bigger barns. What a great idea. This solves this problem, right? He'll be set for life because he's got bigger barns. This guy suffered from a syndrome known as bigger barn syndrome, BBS. Bigger barn syndrome. It's a disease that's common to those whose hearts are damaged by greed. Maybe, just maybe, that's why there's so many storage units everywhere. Because we don't have enough room in our homes to store it, so we build bigger barns or we rent barns to store them in. Just maybe. If you got stuff in a storage unit, sorry. Feel your pain this morning. See, after declaring his intentions, this landowner, his intentions were to build the bigger barn. After he declared his intention, he offers an explanation. Here's why I'm building bigger barns. See, again, greed is always looking for some place to hide. It's always looking for a virtue to hide behind. This man decided to build bigger barns so he could secure his future. And he'll have all his needs met for many years to come. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. Thanks to discipline and planning, saving, his kids won't have to take care of him when he's older. He's taken care of. You know, if the story ended there, this man would be our role model. I mean, we'd be talking about him at Financial Peace University, right? But the story doesn't end there. He planned ahead, but he didn't plan far enough ahead. He failed to recognize the God factor in the extra. And he failed to recognize the God factor in how many years that he would have left. He assumed that the abundance of things equal the abundance of time. Life consists of my stuff. As long as I've got stuff, I'll have the life to live. And that very day that he decided to keep his stuff, he actually lost it. As soon as he got off the phone with the barn renovators, he got really bad news. The bad news was he would die sometime in the night. See, he's going to run out of time before he runs out of his stuff. And he realized all of a sudden, now I'm dependent, very dependent on God for my allotment of time. Too bad he didn't recognize God when it came to the allotment of stuff. Verse 20, but God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then you will get what you have prepared, then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? It's a good question. Who will get what you've who will get what you've prepared for yourself? Who will get it? Here's the sobering thought. Somebody else is going to get your stuff. Right? Either we're going to give it away while we have time, or it'll be taken away when we run out of time. Either way, somebody else gets it. And Jesus closes this parable, this story, with a very stern warning. He said, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. Very stern warning. See, this is Jesus' definition of a greedy person. A person who stores up things for himself, but isn't rich toward God. Being rich toward God is Jesus' talk for being generous towards those in need. A greedy person is the man or woman who saves carefully but gives sparingly. Let me say it again. A greedy person is a man or woman who saves carefully but gives sparingly. But what is it that Jesus is trying to warn us of in this story? What's he saying is going to happen if we're generous savers but not generous givers? Is it the fact that we're going to die because we're not a generous giver? No, death it comes to everyone. We're all going to die. It's appointed unto men once to die, then comes the judgment. That's natural, okay? So it's not death. That's not his point. It's not what he's trying to say. Is it unexpected death, that if you are not a generous giver, but you're a generous saver, that you're going to unexpectedly die? No, that's not what he's trying to communicate. The real moral of this story is that if our eagerness to store up material goods outpaces our willingness to give, we will suffer a complete and total loss when our time runs out. Let me read it again. Say it again. If our eagerness to store up material goods outpaces our willingness to give, we will suffer a complete and total loss when our time runs out. Matthew 6:19-21, Jesus said this. He said, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. See, this landowner, this wealthy farmer, didn't just lose his life. He lost everything that he considered life. He was rich in this world, but he was poor toward God. Because everything that came his way was used for his private consumption. In the words of Jesus, this guy was a fool. Strong words. A fool that most of us probably would envy had we known him. A fool that many of us would have had a tendency to emulate because he seemed responsible. See, the parable of the rich farmer or the landowner, it teaches us two really important things. One is it defines greed from God's perspective. And then it offers a simple remedy. So we learn what greed is from God's perspective, but we also learn a simple remedy. See, the remedy for greed is a habit. It's a habit. Here's a question that we need to ask ourselves all the time. Why do I have so much? Why do I have so much? Now, I know some of you are thinking, man, there's a bunch that I still want. What do you mean what I have so much? Like, if we could separate the things that we potentially want to have, and let's just look solely at what we have. Just look at what you have, not what you want, but what you have. Because a lot of times what we want causes us to not see what we have. But if we're looking at what we have, I will guarantee you, well, let me say, I'm pretty sure that you have more than what your parents had when they were your age. I know I do. I'll bet your kids have more than you had when you were their age. I'll bet if you look around the world, you'll see that we have way more than most of the world. You realize we are the richest nation. When you travel, if you've ever traveled outside of the U.S., there is some serious poverty out there. The church that we support and have adopted in Honduras, the pastor makes $200 a month. And that's average. I mean, we are rich. We have a lot of stuff. But here's the question that we've got to ask ourselves, because this question, just like the other question, this question has the potential to change our lives. It has the potential to help us self-diagnose our greed problem. Why do I have so much? Why do I have so much? You know, in our consumer-driven culture, we are so laser-focused on what we don't have. And when we focus on what we don't have, it leaves our heart vulnerable to greed. The greedy person's always in a quest for more. And when more comes along, they assume it's for me. It's for me to spend. It's for me to get what I wanted, right? So why do we have so much? The landowner would have said this. He would have said, I deserve it. That's why I have so much. But he didn't recognize the provision of God in his extra. He thought, this is what I've done. This is my hard work. He didn't recognize God and his provision. He failed to recognize the God factor in it all. But you and I are smarter than that. We recognize the God factor. Or do we? You know, when we're in need, we are quick to call out to God, aren't we? I remember a little over a year ago, about a year ago actually, got a call from the insurance company who, said, hey, we're only going to be able to cover $100,000 of your son's accident, and the bill's $500,000. You know what I did immediately when I got off the phone? God, I need help. You know, that's $400 worth of crying out to the Lord. It was pretty serious. So when we're in need, when we lose our job, when we're in financial crisis, who do we call on? We call on God, right? We know the God factor is there. But when we have extra, do we call out to God? Do we ever say, God, what do you want me to do with the extra? No, we don't typically say that. We say, that's for me. What do you want me to do with the extra, God? See, why has God provided you and I with more than we need? Maybe it's so that our kids will have more. Maybe it's so that we don't have to worry and we can just rest and be at peace because we've got all this stuff. Maybe it's so that we can elevate our financial status. Maybe this is a possibility so that we can retire early. That's what the landowner, that's what the farmer had in mind. See, he never considered being generous with his stuff, and he never considered being generous with his time. I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. There's a couple that here at the church that you may have met. You'll get to meet them and know them. They're great people. They've been with us for about a year or so. And they're the parents of Rob and Shelley Black, and it's Melanie and Jim Forrester. Jim retired from IBM in 2006. And instead of saying, hey, let's just eat, drink, and be merry, they asked themselves the question, God, why have you given me so much extra? Why have you given me so much? And so what they did is they reinvested themselves, their time, their energy, their lives into God's work. And they've been a part of our staff for several months now. They got their credentials to become ministers. And they reinvested themselves. Instead of just saying, hey, let's just eat, drink, and be merry, they were mature enough to recognize that God hadn't freed them up. He hadn't freed up their time to just waste. They understood that their free time was a resource that needed to be stewarded responsibly. God had given it to them. God had given them extra. And they said, they may not have said these exact words, but you can tell by their life they said, what do you want me to do with the extra? They avoided bigger barn syndrome. Maybe the reason God is filling up your barns faster than you anticipated is because He's calling you out of the marketplace to invest your life for the kingdom. Maybe. Just a thought. But you know what? Now's the time to start asking. Now's the time to start asking, why? Why do I have more? Why did God give me more? What do you want me to do with the extra? Maybe now's the time to start asking that. See, if forgiveness is the remedy for anger, and confession is the remedy for guilt, the remedy for greed is generosity. See, generous giving will break the grip of greed in our lives. Generous giving will break the grip of greed in our lives. See, whether you think you have extra or not, give. Give. And give generously. Generous giving breaks the grip of greed in our lives. See, you have to give, though, to the point where it forces you to adjust your lifestyle. If you're not willing to give to the point that it impacts your lifestyle, then according to Jesus, you're greedy. Ouch. If you're consuming to the point of having little or nothing left to give, you're greedy. If you're consuming and saving to the point that there's little or nothing to give, you're greedy. Maybe this is hard. Maybe seems cruel to hear it, or even for me to say it seems cruel, but it's true. Maybe it's so hard because you have never had a greedy thought in your life. Maybe you feel compassion every time you see someone in need. And in your heart, you really want to help. You want to give, but you can't. Or you won't. Why? Because you're afraid maybe that you won't have enough? But your heart generally goes out. It genuinely goes out to those that are in need. Your heart is there. So is it fair to say that you're greedy? Brace yourselves. Yes. Yes. Why? Because greed isn't a feeling. Greed is not a feeling. It's a refusal to act. Greed isn't how you feel. It's what you do. Generous feelings and good intentions don't compensate for a greedy heart. See, good intentions and greed can coexist in our heart indefinitely. This is what makes greed so difficult to diagnose. It's hard for us to see it. It's hard for us to identify it. See, you won't feel it like you feel anger. You won't feel it like you feel guilt. You're not going to feel it like you feel jealousy that we'll talk about next week. Greed hides. It disguises itself. It gets behind virtues and good things. And we have to ask ourselves very serious questions. God, what do you want me to do with the extra? God, why have you given me so much? And when we ask ourselves these questions and we're honest with ourselves, it changes our heart. We're able to see things a little differently. Why have you provided me with more than I need, Lord? See, generosity is the remedy for greed. You can't wait to lose weight, right? You can't wait to lose weight. You can't wait to get in shape before you start exercising. Doesn't make sense. If I say, I'm going to wait till I get in shape to start exercising, what? See, you don't wait to start giving until your fear of giving is gone. But a lot of times that's how we approach it. There's just so much fear. As soon as it's gone, as soon as I resolve this, you'll never resolve it. Don't wait to start giving until your fear of giving is gone. Don't wait until God changes your heart to begin giving. See, giving is what God has designed to change our heart. We have to start giving. We start by percentage giving. The Bible is very clear that, we argue with the Lord a lot, but it's percentage giving. You might say, man, 10%, that's a lot. Start with 2%. Start somewhere. If I was telling somebody who needed to lose a lot of weight, hey, you need to exercise, I wouldn't say go run 5 miles tomorrow. I say just walk around your neighborhood. Start somewhere and start adding to it. We're talking about a heart change. We're not talking about legalism. You're not under a curse because you're not doing 10. Just start somewhere. Let God see in your heart that, you know what, God, I don't want greed to be a part of me. And you know what? It's not just about percentage giving. Percentage giving is one thing. The second thing is be a spontaneous giver. When you see somebody in need, give to them. Be a spontaneous giver. God, why have you provided me with more than I need? I mean, there's a lot of things I want, but why do I have more than I need? And Lord, what do you want me to do with my extra? Those two questions will transform your life. The two habits, percentage giving, spontaneous giving, are going to protect you from bigger barn syndrome. They're going to change your heart. And you know what? The day is going to come when you're going to receive an unexpected windfall. The check's going to come in the mail. And your first thought is going to be, who can I help? What kingdom endeavor can I fund? And in that moment, you're going to understand and you're going to know you've broken the power of greed in your life. It's a habit. Generosity is a habit that purges greed from our hearts. It changes everything. Would you stand with me? Gone a little long, but it's okay. Would you bow your heads with me for a moment? Could you just lift your hands as a sign of surrender? I know maybe you've never done this before. It's kind of weird or new or whatever, but just everyone's doing it. So if everybody's doing it, it's cool, right? So let's lift our hands as a sign of surrender. And can we ask God those two questions? God, why have you given me more than I need? Why have you given me more than I need? Get the want out of your head. Why have you given me more than I need? And God, what do you want me to do with the extra? What do you want me to do with the extra? Father, this morning, as we open our hearts to you, as we once again just kind of lay it out there, and God, we ask you to search our heart. We want to guard our heart because we know it affects everything we do. We don't want things to be inside of us that motivate us and drive us through life, but we want to live free. We want to experience life to the fullest, the life that you promised. God, would you help us today to be honest with ourselves and to search our hearts and to allow you to search our heart. Change us. Transform us. Make us more like you.
And I have this hope as an anchor for my soul. Through every storm, I will hold to you with endless love. All my fear is swept away. In everything, I will trust in you. There is hope in the promise of the cross. You gave everything to save the world you love. And this hope is an anchor for my soul. Our God will stand unshakable. Unchanging one, you who was and is to come. Your promise sure, you will not let go. See, there is hope. There is hope in the promise of the cross. You gave everything to save the world you love. And this hope is an anchor for my soul. Our God will stand unshaken. See, there is hope. There is hope in the promise of the